Prius.
Hi everybody, I'm Roy Firestone and this is Up Close Classic. He was one of the most intimidating pitchers of all time. He led the National League in hit batsmen for 4 straight years because, as he put it, a batter digging in is trying to take my livelihood away. Well, there weren't many pitchers who made the kind of impression Don Drysdale did. Cy Young Award in 1962, a couple of World Series titles, and induction into the Hall of Fame. In 1968, Don Drysdale pitched 6 straight shutouts, a record later eclipsed by Orel Hershiser. The year Hershiser broke his record, I talked to Don about his greatest stretch ever.
Let's talk about the streak. 1968, May 14th, it all started. This was maybe the most remarkable pitching streak in contemporary times, certainly in the last couple of decades. When it started, did you have an idea that you were on that kind of roll, that history could be made?
No, not really. Matter of fact, I don't think anything was really made out of it until about the 4th day, or 4th game, I should say, in Houston. And it was something that all of a sudden they went back and they started to look in a record book, and they saw that, well, wait a minute, number 5, that was Doc White with the Chicago White Sox, and then you went into Hubble, and then you went into Walter Johnson. And but there really wasn't, and I really never thought about it. I just am not a record type person, and if they're there, they're there. If they're not, why, you know, what are you going to do about it? You can't eat them.
They asked Don Larson when he pitched the perfect game in the World Series if it was the best game he'd ever pitched. Somebody actually asked him that. But honestly, was it the best stretch of pitching you had ever pitched?
Well, I would have to say during that stretch, I felt as though that I could throw the ball where I wanted to just about every time. And I always broke a game down into 3 parts. I broke it down into pitch by pitch, hitter by hitter, and inning by inning. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't hard to keep that philosophy going in the back of my mind. And then I started playing games with myself that, you know, they wouldn't score. And it just ended up, you just keep going. Hey, you know, like you have the dice, you keep rolling until you're through.
Here you are in the '63 World Series, the 4 straight sweep for the Dodgers over the Yankees. Were you as mean a pitcher as they said you were?
Oh, I don't know. You know how stories they get, you know, the longer you're out of the game, why, the more they build up. I have no idea, but I would have to say that game right there was probably the best game that I ever pitched in my life. And I don't think I've pitched any better. I gave up a base hit against the Cardinals. There's Fairley catching it right at the bullpen gate. Flood got a base hit, and I retired the next 28 in a row. But that was probably the best game that I ever pitched right there.
A couple more questions about that, and then we'll move on. Number 1, Dick Dietz, bases loaded in the 9th inning. Did he or did he not illegally step into the pitch?
Well, Wendelstedt said that he did not try to get out of the way of a slider. And Marichal told me the next day, he said that he sat on the bench, that if he throws anything but a fastball, he said, I'll try and end it right here. But it nicked him, and Harry didn't let him go to first base, and there were bases loaded, nobody out. Mm-hmm. And he flied out, the next guy grounded out, Parker forced him at the plate, and the next guy popped up.
The night of the record-setting moment in Chavez, Robert Kennedy was killed. And that was obviously an American tragedy. It also tended to overshadow your accomplishment, of course. No one came back the next day and interviewed you and spent any time with you. Is there in any way some sadness attached to that night for you?
Well, it's something that I will always remember as far as you say, an American tragedy, because it was a night that was very special to me as we kept going. And I knew Bobby, and he mentioned it at the start of his speech at the Ambassador Hotel just prior to being shot. And he said that I hope that we have as much success as Don Drysdale has. He pitched his 5th shutout tonight, and then after that, why, the rest is history.
Highlights and lowlights. One of the lowlights for you, outside of your playing days, happened in Cleveland.
Yeah.
When somebody, I mean, beyond belief how anyone would tangle with Don Drysdale, but somebody jumped you in an elevator, coming out of an elevator in Cleveland, and mugged you.
I was going up to my room, and I got on, and 2 guys got on behind me, and I wasn't paying any attention, and I pushed a thing to go up, only it went down. And while I was in the elevator, why, they said, you know, let me have your money. And I wouldn't pay any attention. I said, what? And they said, we want your money. I said, oh, no. And the one guy pulled a knife, and I just happened to, I kicked it out of his hand, and the other guy had a gun, and I got it up over his shoulder. And by the time we got off down to the lower part of elevator, why, we'd wrestled out in the street, and they had a third guy in the car and all. I remember someone getting me over the back of the head, but they got my watch and a chain around my neck. And
had you have a chance to think about what it could have been and what it could have
I guess I did after people talked about it, Roy, and I you know, sometimes my folks always tell me, you know, you don't have all the sense in the world. And maybe I didn't have that much at that particular time, but I just did a natural thing, but I've thought that, you know, you might not be here.
When we come back on Up Close Classic, Don Drysdale on his left-handed counterpart, Sandy Koufax. Back. Together, they were the most dominating pitching duo of the 1960s. They won 4 Cy Young Awards in 5 years, and in 1965, Don Drysdale and Sandy Koufax set the National League record for most strikeouts by 2 teammates with 592. But their accomplishments meant little when they both went to Dodger management and asked for a raise.
Koufax and Drysdale, the holdout in 1966. You held out for, I think, $100,000 a man. You don't see dual holdouts anymore. I don't think you've seen it since. Why?
Well, they've kind of legislated against it. Roy, and that's, of course, you're looking at Sandy right there, and I always maintain that every time you watched Koufax pitch, you were maybe able to see a no-hitter. He was that dominating in of course, those 5 or 6 years just before the end of his career. But they've kind of they've legislated against that. You can't do that anymore. You can't bring an agent in or anything like that and say, here's my 2 guys. But the thing about, in that particular case, all they did is try and use one against the other. And it just so happened that we found out about it. And I walked in one day, and the first time I talked to Buzzy Bavasi about salary, and I said, well, I'd like to have that. I won 23 ball games the year before, and between the 2 of us, we won 52, plus the World's Championship.
Wow.
And Buzzy said, oh, come on now. He said, you don't do that to me. He said, what do you want, to get me fired? I said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, Sandy only wants this. I said, well, I don't care what Sandy wants. Nobody knew what your salaries were in those days. Sandy went in the next day, and he did the same thing. And I saw, we had dinner that night. And I knew that Sandy wasn't, something was wrong. And we'd been together too much, in the Army together and all that. And I said, what's the matter? And he said, well, you know, you go in and try and be halfway decent. And he said, and this is what they pull. And so he said, well, I said, when did you talk to him? He said, today. And I said, today? Is it the first time? And he said, yeah. I said, well, I'm a son of a gun. I said, he told me yesterday that you talked and you only wanted this. Ooh. So he says, oh. So that's when we walked in together.
What do you think it did to the game in terms of salary structure? 2 pitchers now worth $100,000.
Well, I don't really know what it did. I know, as I think back, it was very hard on Mr. O'Malley, and it was hard on Buzzy. But all we did was ask for a percentage of what we had got in raises before, except it put us over the $100,000 mark, and there were only about 4 or 5 players doing that at that time, and they were all, you know, Mantle and Mays and Aaron and Musial and Williams, and that's who it was. No pitchers.
You guys were willing to do a movie as a kind of a push away from baseball, as a kind of a threat. Sandy was a baseball player. He didn't want to be part of this whole Hollywood scene. He was a pitcher, and what a pitcher.
Oh, what a guy. You know, we just came off of the road trip, and there were so many 3 and 2s on this last road trip. I finally said on the air, the only 3 and 2 I used to like to see was on the back of that guy right there on the mound. I said, I'll take that. But you know, that's right. We were going to do a movie. It's called Warning Shot with David Jansen. And Buzzy states in his book, he says, if I would have seen these guys act, he says, prior to us signing them, he said, we'd have never signed them.
Koufax, 382 strikeouts. By the way, the youngest Hall of Famer ever at age 36. For 5 years, though, the best ERA in the game. This was a guy who was wild, and he learned how to pitch.
Well, he learned how to pitch one day going over to Orlando, Florida. With we're going to play an exhibition game with the Minnesota Twins, and Norm Sherry was catching with us at the time, now pitching coach with the San Francisco Giants, and he said, Sandy, you know, we had our own plane. He said, why don't you just back off, take it about 3/4 time, and just see if we can get some kind of rhythm going here. I mean, I've seen Sandy miss the batting cage. I've seen him miss the screen behind the pitching strings in Vero Beach and throw them all the way down the right field line. I mean, I've seen him miss a whole bunch of things. And but Sandy was the type of guy that he would keep coming back, but he was very embarrassed. You could beat Sandy. Don't embarrass him. And so he was ready to take that plunge. He was going to back it off. Well, he backed it off. He got his mechanics together, and and therein created the monster. But what a monster he was.
Yeah. There's an interesting story about Sandy, and I know that you will confirm it at least somewhat. People don't believe this when I tell them, but when he was around 48, 49, like this is 4 or 5 years ago in Vero Beach, Sandy was clocked on the jugs gun at about 90 miles an hour, and he seriously contemplated coming back at age 48. Now, I don't know if you know that part of it, but I know that you saw him throwing one day and he could really throw.
I was talking to him a few days after that. I'd read that in the paper, and I'd gone over to Vero Beach for something, and exhibition game or something, and I said, "What in the world are you doing?" And he said, I just happened to be throwing. I said, "Criminy," I said, "you know," I said, "throwing like that," I said, "you can make a comeback." He said, "No," I said, "I got one problem." And I said, "What's that?" He says, "Once I stop, I can't start again." I said, "That's it, forget it."
But you think, you know, if he goes, he's in great shape.
Yeah.
He's lean, maybe too lean. You think for a few batters, maybe an inning, he could still do it, don't you?
Oh, I know he could. If
Wow.
he started and got going, of course he could.
Mm. When you look back at Sandy, in terms of how he threw, do you feel that maybe he might have jeopardized the later years of his career because he threw too hard and couldn't pace himself? He didn't know how to quit.
Well, I think basically he got that arthritic elbow, and there was only one way for Sandy to pitch, and that was to throw hard. He fooled around with a forkball at the end of his career, and that was about the only off-speed pitch that he worked at. But he had one style of pitching, and that was it. It was power.
Still to come on Up Close Classic, the fine art of the brushback pitch. At the height of his career, Don Drysdale pitched more than 300 innings a season. He was a hard-throwing sidearmer, but the stress of all those innings at that pace finally took their toll. In 1969, after 14 seasons with the Dodgers, shoulder problems forced Don Drysdale to retire.
You got out at 33.
Yeah.
Would you be hanging on a little bit on some DL somewhere, picking up $1 million salary a la Dan Quisenberry and John Tudor and some of that? Not to denigrate these guys,
No.
but the money is there. Would you be hanging on to 36, 37?
I'll tell you one thing. If I could make the money that these guys are playing today, they'd have to come out with scissors and cut the uniform off me, believe me.
I bet, but I'll tell you, the story with you was you got hit by a line drive from Clementi's bat, drew blood.
That's when I had my arm was bad. I was taking medication, and I would take some medication from here because this wasn't working. So I'd go to this trainer and get some more on the night that I would pitch, and pretty soon, things got a little fuzzy. I mean, I had to go like this to read the scoreboard, and that last night, the last game that I pitched, Clementi hit a line drive, and I lost it somewhere out there. And I thought I had a fly on my ear, and I reached up like that to flick the fly off, and I looked down, and it was blood. So I said, that's all.
No more. Okay, we're going to get into it with this book because this is a very controversial book. Among the things Don says, doesn't hold anything back, American League pitchers are afraid to throw strikes, right? They grow beards to look intimidating, but they don't intimidate me, says Don.
Well, you know, I've never understood what the beard... Most of us, when we get our age, we want to look younger. These guys, I mean, they don't realize a mustache or a beard makes them look older. I don't understand that. But anyway, I don't see people throwing inside in the American League. I don't see them throwing inside basically that much anymore, and I've always maintained I'm not condoning hitting anybody, knocking anybody down, but you've got to establish part of the plate. And if you don't, you're going to get your brains beat out, and you can grow a beard all the way down to here, and it isn't going to help you.
Now, you led baseball. I think you set the record for most hit batsmen in a season and in a career. We've got some video of you throwing pretty close to a guy. I don't know if it was intentional, but there's a little bit of a plunk in there. There's Frank Robinson getting inside, I think.
Look at how easy Rosie caught that ball. Huh?
You're saying Frank was a bit of a wimp leaning over there.
You know what, Frank, I've talked to Frank about this. Frank changed his hitting style. He used to stand back off of the plate. He really did. When he first came up in 1956, he stood back off of the plate, and I said, why did you change and move up onto the plate? He said, because they kept getting me out there. So that shows me intelligence on his part. He stood right up on top of the plate, not only knew that he was going to get hit, dared you to hit him or knock him down, and still's in the Hall of Fame.
You played for 13 years for Smokey Alston, and the one memorable moment in the book is when there's that turning point where he looked at you in the dugout and said, hey, kid, can you throw strikes? And you said, yes, sir.
That was it. That was 1955 or 55 in the dugout, and the Yankees were killing us in Vero Beach, and Blackwell was in with the Yankees, and Russ Meyer started with the Dodgers. Pete Wojcicki came in, and nobody could throw strikes, and he was so mad. He hated base on balls. And he said, is there anybody around here that can throw a strike? And I just happened to be looking up because I heard him start to talk, and he caught my eye, and I said,
right here. Oh, yeah, I can do it. When Roy Campanella was welcomed back, I think in '59, and they had that candlelight moment at the Coliseum, it sent chills to 55, 60,000, 90,000 that were
well,
there.
they'll never, it was the biggest crowd in baseball ever saw a game. That was when he came out, they were playing the Yankees in an exhibition game, and there's the captain right behind him, Pee Wee Reese. And what a night. Something that, remember the lighters and the matches? Wow.
Long before they did it in rock and roll, this was the moment when they lit those candles. Everybody went out, and boy, that was
Johnny
something.
Padres, yes, sir.
Get you chills, I'll tell you that. Jackie Robinson, the most intense ball player you'd ever played with, but the most important ball player you'd ever played with.
Well, you know, Jackie could come in, if you were in trouble, and you were getting yourself in trouble, he could come in, grab the rosin bag, throw it back down, and give you probably the quickest dissertation that you had better listen to than any person that I was ever around. What a guy. I tell you, I wish I could have played with him a lot longer.
You feel cheated by his loss? Obviously his family does, but do you feel as a human being cheated that not getting to know him as an older man?
I wish that he would have stayed around longer to be able to relay every segment of his life, because he went through such a tough time, and then to let it gradually go back out. I wish he would have been around so much longer.
Coming up next on Up Close Classic, the love story between two Hall of Famers. Welcome back to Up Close Classic. I'm Roy Firestone. She was an All-American at UCLA. He was a hometown hero, a Hall of Famer, and both were making names for themselves in broadcasting when Don Drysdale met and fell in love with Ann Myers.
This has been 3 years now for you, the marriage and the new baby. The little heater, right, Annie?
He's going on too, yes.
Yeah, we had a shot of the little heater right there. Isn't that something? That's terrific. I want to ask you about the marriages of two great players. Of course, you were four-time All-America at UCLA, and you know, clearly a national champion, Olympian. Do you feel in any way, at any point, there's a sublimation of the ego being married to another legend in another sport?
Well, for myself, it hasn't, because I know what I accomplished at a particular time, obviously, when I didn't even know Don, and didn't even know who he was, as a matter of fact, because I didn't follow baseball that much. But my sport was basketball, and what I had accomplished at that particular time, I feel very good about. And not only the Olympics and winning the national championship at UCLA, but the Pacer thing, tryout with the Indiana Pacers. And so I feel very good about those accomplishments, and I know that I did them in my own interest. And now being married to Don, I still have my own identity. I mean, obviously, we're in the same business, too, and I go by Ann Myers.
Yeah.
Believe me, there's a lot of marriages. You just talk about Lucille Ball, who just passed away, and Desi Arnaz, and people in the entertainment business, and that have their own name, women that have kept their own name. Nancy Lopez is the perfect example,
Sure.
Chris Everett. And a lot of those women did take on their husbands' names, but it's interesting, they were all first marriages, and now they're in second marriages, and they've gone back to their original name in what they had accomplished in their sport.
What do you think you admired most about her? I mean, I obviously admire a lot as a person, tremendous amount as a person, Don, but obviously there's an age difference, there's a generational difference. What do you admire most about her as an athlete and as a person?
Well, I think the thing that impressed me once, a gentleman told me in New York at a Hall of Fame banquet, and of course, I never realized till I saw a portfolio on Annie that at one time, she was the only four-time All-American in a collegiate sport, male or female, in history. And he told me, he said, isn't that Ann Myers over there, a very distinguished white-haired gentleman? And she was talking with John Havlicek and some other basketball people. I said, yes, it is. He said, you know, he said, I followed her for years and years. Now, I don't know who this man is at all. And he says, the greatest all-around athlete, he said, since the Babe. I said, gee, that's pretty nice.
And it could have been either Babe Ruth or Babe Dickinson's.
Yeah, I know you're talking about Babe. Yeah, but Babe
right.
only one way. But
Right.
Babe Dietrichson Zaharias was quite an all-around athlete.
Sure.
And Annie is an all-around athlete. She played 7 different sports. But the thing that I like about her is the competitive edge, and she's fought an uphill battle in the broadcasting profession. She's been a first in a lot of things, but as Billie Jean King was in you know, the tennis and moving things up through there. But it's she keeps going, and you got to keep going in life.
Yeah, I know it was disappointing for you to not have Don at the Hall of Fame induction at UCLA because he was in a ball game. He was broadcasting, I think, the Braves series in Atlanta, because you wanted very much to show him that side of you, to share in the UCLA experience for you.
Well, I think because we both are in the business and we understand that there are going to be times where you just cannot make certain things and you do have the conflicts. Yes, it would have been very important, but I knew that he was thinking about me and his heart and his prayers were with me. I was just nominated for the Basketball Hall of Fame. I did not get inducted. And I think that is a great honor also. And I know in his heart that if that were to occur, then I'm sure he would be there. And I had the very good fortune of being in Cooperstown in 1984 when he was inducted. And I didn't know what Cooperstown really was, and being there, it's awesome.
Sure.
I mean, it really is to be back there, and it's a special feeling.
Let me ask you then what I asked him. What you admired mostly, now you can take a look at some footage of him from 20 years ago, and see the fire, and boy, what a fiery ball player was and a great athlete. What you admire as an athlete and as a person of your husband?
Well, I think the fact that he is a winner and seeing what he did as a baseball player and his accomplishments. The one thing that really impressed me, Roy, when I first met him and would go to baseball games was the age differences in young children to the very, very old coming up and asking for his autograph. And I mean, that's very impressive when you have that kind of command, not a command over people, but they really admire somebody like that. And that, I think, really impressed me. And also, to hear people when I'm away from Don, some of his friends, and he doesn't know this, I'm sure, and just people off the street that maybe have met him saying,